The day I found the glossy, trifold brochure tucked away in the back of my husband's desk drawer, nestled beneath a stack of his private financial statements, I knew my illness was not the only battle I was facing. The brochure's cover was deceptively cheerful, showing silver-haired seniors laughing over a game of cards. Willow Creek Assisted Living, the elegant script read, a graceful transition. It was a transition I had never discussed, a future I had never imagined. For 40 years, Richard had been my partner, my rock, the man I vowed to spend my life with, in sickness and in health. But as my body weakened, a different, more calculating side of him emerged. As cold and hard as the marble floors in our grand entryway, I am Catherine Vance, and this is the story of how a debilitating diagnosis became the catalyst for the greatest betrayal of my life, and how I fought back, not from a position of strength, but from a wheelchair in the quiet corners of my own. Home, he was trying to steal right out from under me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Life before the diagnosis was a vibrant, sprawling tapestry. Richard and I were a formidable team in the world of boutique real estate. We didn't build skyscrapers, we resurrected beauty. I had the eye and almost uncanny ability to see the soul hidden within a dilapidated Victorian, its gables sagging, or to envision a thriving garden in an overgrown, forgotten plot of land. Richard had the charm he could sell a vision with, a handshake and a confident smile, persuading bankers and buyers alike to believe in the potential that I saw. Our estate, a sprawling Georgian manor on the coast, wasn't just a home. It was a monument to our shared success, a legacy of carefully chosen art and lovingly restored antiques. A place I believed we would one day pass down together. Then the first tremors began, a fork clattering to the floor, signature that wavered, uncharacteristically. The diagnosis came swiftly after, a progressive neurological disorder. Doctors used gentle, clinical terms, but the meaning was clear. The body would slowly, inexorably, betray me. The vibrant tapestry of my life began to fray, the brilliant colors fading to muted grays. In the beginning, Richard was the perfect, doting husband, a portrait of patient devotion. He was my hands when they trembled, my legs when they refused to hold me. He oversaw the retrofitting of our home with tasteful brass handrails and a discreet elevator, ensuring my prison remained a gilded one. "I'm here for you, Kate," he would murmur, spoon-feeding me soup on the days my hands wouldn't cooperate, always. I clung to those words like a drowning woman to a life raft as my world shrank to the view from my bedroom window. But as the months bled into a year, the performance began to wear thin. The warmth in his touch felt rehearsed. His readings in the sunroom grew shorter, his sighs longer. The business dinners became more frequent, his explanations more vague. He started isolating me, subtly at first. Old friends who called were told I was resting and couldn't be disturbed. My weekly bridge game partners were politely but firmly uninvited. He was curating my reality, cutting the threads that connected me to my old life under the guise of protecting my health. A new figure began to orbit our lives with increasing frequency, Marcus Thorne. Richard introduced him as a dynamic financial advisor he'd met at the country club. Marcus was everything I was not: slick, impeccably tailored with cold, reptilian eyes that seemed to appraise the value of everything they landed on, including me. He spoke a language of leveraged assets, hostile takeovers, and aggressive growth, a dialect utterly foreign to the careful, patient strategy of value and restoration I had championed my entire life. My first direct interaction with him was unsettling. Richard had wheeled me into the study for a brief update. Marcus was outlining a plan to liquidate a portfolio of municipal bonds I'd held for 30 years. A stable, low-yield investment I considered my financial bedrock. "The returns are pathetic, Catherine," Marcus said, not even making eye contact with me, directing his words to Richard. "We can shift that capital into emerging market funds and see a 20, maybe 30% growth within the year." "Wait, those bonds are safe, Marcus," I said, my voice weaker than I would have liked. Their purpose isn't aggressive growth. Stability. Marcus finally looked at me, a condescending smile playing on his lips. Of course, a more traditional perspective. But the modern financial landscape requires a more robust approach. Richard and I have it well in hand. Richard patted my arm. It's all very complex, sweetheart. Market derivatives, arbitrage. You shouldn't worry your pretty head about it. You just focus on getting better. He wheeled me out of the study before I could protest further, the door clicking shut behind me. I was being dismissed, infantilized in my own home. My only true window to the world, my only ally, was my niece, Amelia. My sister's daughter, she was a firecracker. A newly minted lawyer with a mind as sharp as a shard of glass, and a fierce loyalty that reminded me of my own mother. She visited every Sunday without fail, smuggling in forbidden gossip magazines and outrageously rich pastries. She saw the change in Richard long before I was willing to admit it to myself. "He's building a wall around you, Aunt Kate," she said. One afternoon, her brow furrowed with concern as she helped me with the painful stretches of my physical therapy. "I called on Wednesday and he told me you were asleep. I know for a fact you were watching your favorite classic movie marathon, and that Marcus guy looks at this house like it's already on the market." I made excuses, of course. It's just stress, darling. It's a tremendous burden for him, handling everything on his own. But her words watered the seed of doubt that was already taking root in my heart. The moment that doubt blossomed into terrifying certainty wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, accidental discovery. One evening, Richard was in his study. On a conference call, the door left carelessly ajar. He thought I was napping. I'd quietly wheeled myself into the dimly lit hallway, intending to look at the family photos that lined the walls, a small act of defiance, a pilgrimage to a happier past. It was then that I heard Marcus's voice, tinny and sharp through the speakerphone. "The power of attorney is the key, Richard. The one you had her sign last month. Once that's fully activated by Albright's final report, we can begin the asset liquidation in earnest. The doctors have all confirmed her prognosis is terminal and degenerative. We have a clear and justifiable runway." My blood ran cold. Power of attorney? Last month? I remembered a day I was heavily medicated, my head foggy. Richard had put a stack of papers in front of me, telling me they were routine tax forms and guiding my trembling hand as I signed. "And the niece?" Richard's voice was low, conspiratorial. "She's sharp. She keeps asking about the portfolio." "Leave her to me," Marcus replied smoothly. "We'll paint her as a greedy opportunist, trying to get her hands on the estate. The time she can mount a credible legal challenge, it will be a done deal. You'll be the grieving husband, forced to make difficult but necessary decisions for your wife's long-term care. It's a bulletproof narrative. My wife's long-term care is a Willow Creek brochure. It all slammed into place. This wasn't just mismanagement, this was a coup. They were planning to have me declared incompetent, seize control of every asset we had ever built, and ship me off to a facility to quietly fade away. The man who had vowed to care for me was conspiring to erase me. In that horrifying moment, the fog of my illness and my grief burned away, replaced by the cold, clear Arctic fire of fury. I backed my wheelchair silently away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every muscle in my body screamed with the need to confront him, to scream, to rage. But a deeper, colder part of my mind, the strategist that had built an empire, took control. Thought I was a frail, fading old woman whose mind was as weak as her body. He was about to find out that while my body might be a prison, my mind was now a weapon. My greatest advantage was the one thing they saw as my greatest weakness, my perceived fragility. The next morning, I began the most agonizing and important performance of my life. I was no longer just a sick woman. I was a deep-cover agent in enemy territory, and my home was the war room. I let my gaze wander when Richard spoke, as if I couldn't quite follow his train of thought. I asked him to repeat simple things. I would forget the names of household staff I'd known for a decade. I allowed him to see precisely what he wanted. To see a woman whose mind was unraveling as quickly as her body. It was a humiliating, soul-crushing charade. But every condescending pat on my hand, every look of pity he exchanged with a visiting nurse, fueled my resolve. Their boldness grew in direct proportion to my feigned decline. Marcus Thorne was now a near-permanent fixture, his expensive cologne polluting the air in my home. They held their strategy meetings in the dining room, believing I was dozing in the adjacent living area. Tucked into a shadowy corner, the floral throw blanket over my lap, concealing the tiny, voice-activated digital recorder Amelia had slipped me, I became a silent, invisible witness to my own dismantling. Their conversations were a masterclass in predatory greed. They spoke of selling our vacation home in the Hamptons, a place filled with memories of summers with Amelia as a child. They laughed about how they had managed to liquidate my personal stock portfolio, the one I had built independently before, my marriage, and how the funds were now safely in the Catherine Vance Holdings account. The beauty of it is, we're using her own money to fund the legal framework that disinherits her side of the family. Marcus boasted one afternoon, the clink of ice in his whiskey glass punctuating the sentence like a gunshot. It's poetically efficient. Richard, my husband of 40 years, the man who had wept at our wedding, just chuckled. She always was good with money. It's a shame her mind is going. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it almost defied comprehension. This wasn't a simple plan to take control. It was a systematic erasure of my existence, my history, and my legacy. Each recorded conversation, each whispered conspiracy, was a small victory. Another piece of ammunition in a war they didn't even know I was fighting. My lifeline was Amelia. Our Sunday visits became covert intelligence briefings. While she massaged my atrophied leg muscles, her touch firm and steady, she would whisper updates. I, in turn, would palm her the tiny memory card from the recorder, my frail hand shaking. With a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Aunt Kate, this is bigger and more organized than we thought," she murmured one Tuesday, her voice a low, urgent hum. She had taken a temporary leave from her junior law firm position, telling her family it was to help with my full-time care. In reality, she had turned her small apartment into a legal command center, spending her days buried in financial documents and legal precedents. He's not just moving money. He's been meeting regularly with a Dr. Alistair Albright, a geriatric psychiatrist with a very questionable reputation. Richard is building a case to get a formal declaration of your mental incompetence. The news hit me harder than anything else. He wasn't just satisfied with stealing my fortune. He was trying to steal my very identity, my sanity, myself. "Can't do that," I whispered, my voice hoarse with a fear so primal it threatened to choke me. My mind is the one thing I have left." "He can and he will try," Amelia countered, her expression grim. "He'll parade in a paid-for expert to testify that you're confused, paranoid, and incapable of making sound decisions. He'll use your physical dependence as Exhibit A for your mental decline." She squeezed my hand, her grip fierce. "But he's underestimating you. He is most definitely underestimating me." Amelia, bless her tenacious heart, began to build our counteroffensive. She knew she was outmatched by Marcus Thorne's experience, so she sought a bigger gun. She found a retired but legendary litigator, a man named Samuel Blackwood, known in his prime as the Shark. Blackwood was famous for his ferocious courtroom, his presence, and his utter intolerance for bullies who preyed on the vulnerable. She met him in secret at a dusty old diner, laying out the situation and, with a trembling hand, playing him one of the most damning recordings. Blackwood, initially reluctant to come out of retirement, reportedly sat in stunned silence after hearing Richard and Marcus's callous plotting. The old fire returned to his eyes. He agreed to represent me, taking the case pro bono, fueled by a righteous anger that matched my own. Our plan was simple and terrifying. Let Richard and Marcus walk deeper into their own trap. We needed more than just recordings of their intentions. We needed a solid, irrefutable paper trail of their actions. Amelia. Using a limited power of attorney I had wisely given her years ago for my health care decisions, a document Richard and Marcus knew nothing about, began to legally, if covertly, subpoena financial records. The first threads they pulled on unraveled quickly. She discovered the newly formed LLC, Catherine Vance Holdings, with Richard as the sole director. She found the records of my heirloom stocks being sold, and the subsequent wire transfers into the LLC's accounts. It was all there, in black and white. One afternoon, Richard came into my room, his face a perfect mask of solicitous concern. He was holding the glossy Willow Creek brochure. "Look, my love," he said, his voice oozing with false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "I found the most wonderful place for you. It's more like a 5-star resort than a nursing home. They have round-the-clock medical care, beautiful rose gardens. It would be so much better for you. But the stress of managing this big house of your care, it's all becoming too much for me." I stared at the pictures of the smiling, vacant-eyed residents. This was his endgame. To have me declared incompetent, move me into this gilded cage, and take complete and utter control. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment his quiet, creeping betrayal became an overt act of war. I looked at him, my husband, the man I had loved, and felt nothing but a vast, frozen expanse of ice in my veins. I let a single, perfect tear roll down my cheek, a masterpiece of feigned despair. "Whatever you think is best, Richard," I whispered, my voice trembling convincingly. "I trust you completely." He smiled, a look of triumphant pity on his face. He bent down to kiss my forehead, the Judas kiss. "I knew you'd understand," he said softly. "Dr. Albright is coming next Tuesday for a final evaluation. Just a formality, really, to make sure we get you the best possible placement." Out of the room, brochure in hand, I met Amelia's eyes. She had been standing silently in the doorway, a witness to the entire performance. Her expression was pure steel. The final pieces were in place. The trap was set. The time for silent observation was over. The time for action was about to begin. The week leading up to Dr. Albright's final evaluation was the longest of my life. I existed in a state of suspended animation, playing the part of the fading matriarch while my mind sharp and cold. Worked with Amelia and Samuel Blackwood to choreograph the final act. Each day was a tightrope walk of deception. I had to smile weakly at the man who was plotting my destruction. Thank him for the lukewarm tea he brought me, all the while knowing he was counting the days until he could sign me away. I felt like a ghost in my own life, an unseen presence watching the final scenes of a tragedy, except I was secretly rewriting the ending. Amelia, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of controlled fury. Guided by Blackwood, she unearthed a trail of deceit that went deeper than we ever imagined. The discovery that Richard had taken out a $2 million line of credit against our home was staggering. But the real horror was in the details. The loan wasn't from a major bank. It was from a hard money lender, a private firm specializing in high interest. Short-term loans, the kind of lender one goes to when they can't secure traditional financing. The terms were predatory. A massive balloon payment was due in just 6 months. There was no way Richard could have paid it back without liquidating major assets. The loan was designed to fail. He was setting himself up to lose the house, Aunt Kate, Amelia explained, her voice tight with disbelief as we reviewed the documents late one night. It makes no sense, unless... Her voice trailed off, but I knew what she was thinking. Losing the house was the entire point. The next revelation was even more personal and chilling. Amelia threw a contact at the county clerk's office. I managed to get a copy of Richard's revised will, drafted just 2 months prior. The document was a masterpiece of legal cruelty. He had rewritten it to establish a charitable trust upon his death, to be managed by a board of directors consisting of Marcus Thorne and 2 of his unknown associates. This trust would absorb the entirety of our shared estate with a small, insulting stipend of $5,000 a month designated for my ongoing care at a certified facility. It was just enough to keep me alive, but not enough to give me any power or comfort. My own family, including Amelia, was written out entirely, dismissed in a single, cold sentence. He was planning for a future where he outlived me, ensuring that even in death, his betrayal would be absolute. He was not just stealing from me. He was salting the earth of my legacy. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that exposed the true monstrous scope of their plan, came from a bit of inspired investigative work by Amelia, cross-referencing names from the hard money lenders. Board of directors, she found a connection to Jason Keller, the man Richard had dismissed as an old college roommate. A little more digging revealed that Jason wasn't just a disbarred developer. His current consulting firm was the primary beneficiary listed in the event of a default on our home loan. The plan was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just about Richard and Marcus getting rich. It was a three-headed serpent. Richard would get me out of the way. Marcus would bleed the liquid assets. And Jason Keller, the predator, would get the grand prize, our magnificent multi-million-dollar home for the price of the outstanding loan. Richard would play the part of the tragic, grieving husband who had lost his wife's mind and then his home trying to care for her. He would walk away looking like a victim, while likely receiving a hefty, untraceable kickback from Keller. I felt a profound, bone-deep weariness settle over me. It was one thing to be betrayed for simple greed. It was another to see the sheer, intricate artistry of the cruelty. To know that my husband had allied himself with the worst kinds of people to orchestrate my complete and total ruin. "It's time," I said to Amelia, my voice quiet but unshakable. "I cannot live like this for one more day. I want to see his face when he realizes the frail old woman in the wheelchair holds all the cards." Samuel Blackwood agreed. The confrontation needed to be on our terms, a carefully orchestrated piece of theater that would give them no room to maneuver. The stage was set for the following Tuesday, the day Richard had scheduled for Dr. Albright to perform my final evaluation at the house, an evaluation that was meant to be the final nail in the coffin of my legal autonomy. On the morning of the confrontation, strange preternatural calm settled over me. I chose my outfit carefully, not a sick woman's nightgown, but an elegant cream-colored cashmere lounge set. I wanted to look regal, even in my chair. Amelia arrived early, a smart navy blue suit, her armor, her briefcase filled with our ammunition. She was no longer just my niece. She was my champion, my legal counsel, my executor. Samuel Blackwood was scheduled to arrive precisely 10 minutes after Dr. Albright, timing his entrance for maximum dramatic impact. At 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Richard, looking somber and suitably responsible in a charcoal gray suit, ushered in Dr. Albright and, to my pleasant surprise, Marcus Thorne himself. Marcus's presence was an unexpected gift. Having both architects of my ruin in the same room was more than I could have hoped for. "Catherine, my dear," Richard said, his voice a perfect symphony of false concern. "Dr. Albright is just here for a simple chat to see how you're feeling. Marcus was kind enough to join us to help me walk through the necessary paperwork afterwards. All for your own good, you understand." I nodded slowly, my eyes downcast, my hands trembling just slightly for effect. I let them get comfortable in the grand living room, arranging their chairs in a semicircle around my wheelchair like inquisitors. They saw a helpless invalid, a final detail to be managed. They had no idea they had just walked willingly into the web. Dr. Albright began with his series of patronizing questions, testing my memory, my orientation. I answered them slowly, with deliberate, feigned hesitation. Playing my part to the very end, Richard and Marcus exchanged a look of smug satisfaction. The trap was closing. Their victory was moments away. Then, right on cue, the doorbell rang again, a sharp, authoritative chime that cut through the quiet room. "I'll get it," Richard said, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the interruption. He opened the massive front door to find Samuel Blackwood standing on the porch, its imposing 6'4" frame filling the doorway, a thick leather briefcase in his hand like a weapon. "This is a private residence and a private medical evaluation," Richard snapped, instinctively trying to block his entry. "Not anymore, it isn't." Blackwood's voice boomed through the house, deep and resonant. "I'm Samuel Blackwood, and I'm here representing my client, Mrs. Catherine Vance." He stepped past a stunned and sputtering Richard and strode into the living room, his sharp eyes taking in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. "And I believe we have a great deal to discuss." The atmosphere in the living room, once thick with condescension, instantly crackled with electric tension. Dr. Albright, who had been leaning forward with an air of clinical authority, snapped, upright in his chair as if he'd received a physical shock. Marcus Thorne's slick, self-satisfied smile evaporated, replaced by a flicker of disbelief that quickly hardened into palpable alarm. Richard, his face a ghastly shade of pale, stumbled. And behind Samuel Blackwood, his voice a frantic, sputtering whisper, "This is highly irregular. An intrusion. Catherine is not well. She's not in any position to retain counsel. She is confused." On the contrary, Blackwood's voice was a low rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the crystal on the mantelpiece. "My client possesses a clarity of mind that would put everyone in this room to shame. Clarity which you gentlemen, in your boundless arrogance, seem to have catastrophically underestimated." He placed his briefcase on the antique coffee table between us, the sound of the latches clicking open, echoing in the dead silence. "Mrs. Vance has graciously allowed me to sit in on this evaluation. She has also asked me to discuss a few financial matters with you, Richard, and with you, Mr. Thorne. And you, Dr. Albright, might want to pay close attention as well." For the first time since they had entered the room, all three men turned their full attention to me. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I straightened my back in the wheelchair, a simple movement that felt imbued with immense power. The frail, trembling facade I had worn for so many agonizing months fell away, not like a gentle shedding of skin, but like a statue cracking to reveal the unyielding granite beneath. I met my husband's wide, terrified eyes, my own gaze as clear and cold as a winter morning. The look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face was the first taste of a victory I had craved for so long. It was the expression of a man who had just seen a ghost sit up at its own funeral and demand a full accounting. "Catherine, what? What is the meaning of this?" he stammered, his eyes darting between my face and the imposing figure of Samuel Blackwood. "This," I said, my voice resonating with a strength he hadn't heard in over a year, clear and steady and utterly devoid of the quavering weakness he had grown accustomed to, "is what happens when you mistake a physical cage for a mental one. This is the end of the performance, Richard." Blackwood, with the timing of a master showman, began to lay out his exhibits. "Let's start with this," he said, sliding a paper across the polished wood toward a frozen Marcus Thorne. "This is a certificate of incorporation for a limited liability. Company called Thorne Vance Holdings. It's an entity, Mr. Thorne, that you established 3 months ago with Mr. Richard Vance as the sole director. An entity into which over $1.7 million of Mrs. Vance's personal, premarital assets have been illegally transferred." Marcus stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. "All transactions were approved by my client. Mr. Vance, acting in his wife's best interest, and with her full power of attorney, a power of attorney she was coerced into signing while heavily medicated." Blackwood interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He produced another document. "And is it in her best interest to secure a $2 million predatory hard money loan against this property? A loan facilitated by this fraudulent medical attestation of diminished capacity." Turned his fiery gaze on Dr. Albright, who flinched as if struck. "A letter, doctor, that you signed after a single 15-minute social visit, without conducting a single neurological or psychiatric test. A letter which I assure you will be the centerpiece of a formal complaint I will be filing with the State Medical Board before lunch today." Dr. Albright went from white to a mottled green. "Now wait just a moment. My assessment was based on Mr. Vance's detailed daily reports of his wife's deteriorating condition. So you didn't perform your own due diligence?" Blackwood thundered. "You simply took the word of a man who stood to gain her entire fortune by having his wife declared incompetent?
Ow!
A man who, I might add, paid your consulting fee from an account funded by the very assets he was trying to steal. That sounds less like a medical opinion and more like a purchase. He didn't give anyone a moment to recover." Turned back to Richard. "And then there's the matter of the ultimate beneficiary of this elaborate and cruel scheme." He produced a copy of Richard's revised will, a charitable trust to be managed by Mr. Thorne, effectively disinheriting Mrs. Vance's entire family. "An interesting choice, given Mr. Thorne's documented history of managing the funds of wealthy widows into his own pockets. At that precise moment, Amelia stepped forward from the doorway where she had been watching, a silent sentinel. She held a tablet in her hand. "And let's not forget your new business partner, Uncle Richard," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence with the sharp edge of youthful fury. She turned the tablet screen toward him. On it was a crystal-clear photograph of Richard on a golf course, shaking hands and laughing with the disgraced developer, Jason Keller. "Funny how you reconnected with an old college roommate who just happens to specialize in acquiring properties from the elderly through foreclosure auctions. A man who was disbarred for real estate fraud in 2 states? Was he going to be the one to help you out when you inevitably defaulted on the predatory loan you took out on my aunt's house?" Richard stared at the photo, then at me, his face a mask of crumbling disbelief. The carefully constructed world of his deceit, built over months of careful planning, was collapsing around him in a matter of minutes. He had been so sure of my weakness, so confident in his narrative of the doting, burdened husband. It never, in his wildest nightmares, imagined that the silent woman in the wheelchair was listening, watching, and building an arsenal against him. This is insane," Richard finally managed, finding his voice, though it was thin and reedy. "She's ill. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. He jabbed a trembling finger at Amelia, his eyes wild with desperation. "You've been poisoning her mind, manipulating her for your own financial gain." I laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound from under U's, but it was a genuine, liberating laugh. "Manipulation, Richard. Is that what you call it when a woman decides she doesn't want to be drugged, robbed, blind, legally erased, and left to rot in a nursing home by the man who vowed to love her in sickness and in health?" I wheeled myself forward, the soft whir of the electric motor the only sound in the room. My voice dropped to an intense, quiet command. "Dr. Albright, your career, as you know it, is over. However, if you provide a full confession of your role in this conspiracy to my attorney, we may consider informing the medical board of your cooperation. I suggest you leave my home now and contemplate your options." The doctor, sweating profusely, scrambled for his medical bag and practically ran from the room without a backward glance. "Mr. Thorne," I continued, my eyes locking on the so-called financial genius. "Every transaction, every phone call, every email has been documented and recorded. You can face my husband in court as a co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar fraud case. Or you can reverse every single transaction, return every last cent to my accounts, and provide a full written admission of your actions. You have 1 hour to decide. Your time starts now." Marcus, his face ashen, looked at Richard with utter contempt, then at the implacable face of Samuel Blackwood, wordlessly turned and followed the doctor out the door. Now it was just Richard, Amelia, Blackwood, and me. The room felt vast and empty. My husband stood alone in the center of the living room, a pathetic, defeated figure, stripped of his accomplices and his arrogance. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick marking a second of his old life slipping away forever. "Kate, I was just trying to protect our assets," he finally whispered, the excuse sounding feeble and ludicrous even to his own ears. "Your illness, the markets are so volatile. I was trying to secure our future. Our future?" I repeated, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "You mean your future?" "A future built on my money and my house, after you'd locked me away and forgotten the key." I reached over to the side table where he had left the Willow Creek brochure. That morning, held it up between my thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of trash. Was this part of securing our future, too? A graceful transition for me. A financial windfall for you. He had no answer. His face crumpled. The suave, charming man I had married, the confident titan of real estate, was gone. In his place was a cornered, desperate, and profoundly small stranger. "You have 2 hours to pack a single suitcase and leave my house," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. "Amelia will remain here to escort you out. Your remaining personal effects, your clove clubs, your ridiculously expensive watches will be packed by staff and sent to a location of your choosing. Everything else, this house, the furniture, the art, the accounts. Our shared history is now under my exclusive control. I let the words settle in the heavy silence. If you try to fight this, if you contact me in any way other than through your attorney, Samuel will file a civil and criminal complaint so vast and so damning, it will take you the rest of your miserable life to unravel. He will depose every person you have ever known. He will shine a light into every dark corner of your life, Richard. The choice is yours. A quiet, impoverished exile, or a loud, spectacular, and public ruin. Is that understood? Richard stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The dawning, horrified understanding in his eyes was absolute. The woman he had written off, the asset he was planning to liquidate, was not just alive and well mentally, but was now the sole arbiter of his fate. He simply nodded, a jerky, puppet-like movement. He didn't fight. The swift, brutal efficiency of our counterattack had shattered his nerve. As Amelia stood by the front door, arms crossed, a silent and unyielding guard, he shuffled upstairs, like a man twice his age. An hour later, he descended with a single, expensive-looking leather suitcase, a pathetic remnant of his former life. His face was a gray, hollow mask.
Oh.
He wouldn't meet my eyes. As he walked past my wheelchair on his way to the door, he hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hand twitching as if he wanted to reach out to touch my arm one last time. "Kate," he began, his voice a dry, rasping croak. "There is nothing left to say, Richard." I cut him off, my gaze fixed on the painting above the fireplace. "Amelia will see you out." The click of the heavy oak door closing behind him was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of shackles falling away. It was the sound of my life, my home, my very self being returned to me. Silence that followed was not empty. It was pristine. It was filled with the promise of a new beginning, a clean slate. I looked at Samuel Blackwood, who gave me a slow, appreciative nod, a rare smile touching his lips. "That," he said, his deep voice resonating with respect, "was one of the finest and most complete victories I have ever had the privilege of witnessing." "I wasn't performing at the end," I replied, feeling the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that lay beneath the layers of adrenaline and righteous anger. I was just being myself, for the first time in a very long time. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal activity, a process I dubbed the Purge. Blackwood and his team descended upon our finances with the precision of a surgical team. Their first priority was to undo the immediate damage. They filed an emergency injunction, freezing Thornvance Holdings and every account associated with Richard and Marcus. They paid a visit to the predatory hard money lender, presenting them with the irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy involving Dr. Albright and Jason Keller. Faced with a massive lawsuit and the threat of criminal investigation for conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, the lender quickly and quietly agreed to void the $2 million loan, wiping the debt clean. The threat to my home was neutralized. Next came the painstaking process of clawing back my assets. Marcus Thorne, clearly terrified of prosecution and being financially ruined by Blackwood, was remarkably cooperative. He worked with our forensic accountants to reverse the stock sales, thankfully, before the market took a significant downturn, unwound the complex web of transfers he had created. Within 2 weeks, my personal portfolio was fully restored, every last cent accounted for. Amelia was my rock through it all. She was my hands and my feet, a blur of motion shuttling between law offices and banks, translating complex legal jargon into plain English. She took a particular savage pleasure in personally serving Jason Keller with a cease and desist letter so terrifying it likely made him consider moving to a country with no extradition treaty. She set up a new secure trust for my estate, one with so many layers of protection that it was virtually impenetrable. I called it the Fortress. One of the most difficult tasks was the emotional purge. Going through our shared home office, I found caches of documents I had never seen, secret plans for a retirement in Monaco that didn't include me, high-risk investments he had made without my knowledge using our joint funds. It was like discovering a secret life, a testament to a betrayal that had begun long before my diagnosis. Each discovery was a fresh wound, a small death. "You don't have to do this, Aunt Kate," Amelia said gently, finding me late one night in front of an open box of old photo albums, tears streaming silently down my face as I looked at a picture of a young, happy Richard and me on our honeymoon in Italy. "Yes, Amelia, I do," I insisted, my voice thick with emotion. "I need to see the whole picture. I need to understand how I could have been so blind, so trusting." "You weren't blind, you were in love," she replied softly, wrapping a warm blanket around my shoulders. "You were trusting. That's not a character flaw. His exploitation of that trust is his and his alone." Her words were a balm to my raw, wounded spirit. The fault was not mine. The fault was in his character, a fundamental flaw that my illness had not created but merely revealed in its stark, ugly truth. A week after Richard left, a letter arrived from his newly retained lawyer. It was a pathetic, last-ditch attempt at a settlement. He was willing to walk away without contesting the formal division of assets. Assets which were now entirely mine, in exchange for a modest annual stipend for living expenses and a legally binding guarantee that we would not press criminal charges. I slid the letter across the desk to Samuel Blackwood. "What do you want to do, Catherine?" he asked, his eyes watching me intently. "You have enough evidence here to put him in prison for years. Fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse. The list is long." I thought about it for a long time. I pictured Richard in a courtroom, a broken old man being publicly humiliated. I pictured myself on the witness stand, reliving every painful, intimate detail of his betrayal. And I realized with a sudden, surprising clarity that I wanted something more than revenge. I wanted peace. I wanted to close this chapter of my life so completely that not even a whisper of it could follow me into my future. No criminal charges, I decided, my voice firm, but no stipend. Not one penny. He gets nothing but the clothes on his back. And whatever is left in his personal bank account after he pays his lawyer, he will sign over his half of every remaining shared asset, effective immediately. And he will sign a non-disclosure agreement so airtight that he won't be able to whisper my name to a stranger in a bar without facing total financial ruin. I don't want to destroy him, I concluded. I just want him to disappear from my life, to become a ghost. Blackwood smiled, a true and genuine smile. "An elegant solution," he said. "A fate far worse than prison for a man like Richard, irrelevance." The final papers were drawn up and signed. The reckoning was complete. The purge was over. I was in full and sole possession of my home, my fortune, and my future. But the most important question remained, hanging in the quiet, empty rooms of my magnificent house. What was I going to do with it all? The legacy I had planned to build with Richard was a ruin. Now, I had to build a new one, by myself. From the ashes, with the legal battles won, and my financial security firmly re-established, an unexpected silence descended upon the house. The frantic, purposeful energy of the fight was gone, replaced by the quiet reality of my new, solitary life. For the first time in years, I was truly alone, and the future felt like a vast, intimidatingly blank page. The sprawling estate I now controlled, which should have felt like the spoils of victory, instead felt like a heavy, gilded anchor. It was a legacy built for two, now held by one, and its original purpose had been corrupted beyond recognition. My first decision was to reclaim the house itself. It was filled with the ghosts of a shared life that I now knew to be a lie. The heavy, dark, masculine furniture Richard had favored, the imposing portraits, the ostentatious displays of wealth, they all had to go. Amelia, ever my partner in crime, helped me coordinate with a prestigious auction house. We held a private sale, and I watched with a grim sense of satisfaction as pieces of my old life were sold off one by one. The mahogany dining table where Marcus and Richard had plotted my ruin was purchased by a hotelier. The king-size bed I had once shared with my husband was dismantled and carted away. It was a symbolic cleansing, a necessary exorcism. In their place, I chose light, air, and comfort. We brought in designers who understood my vision. Walls were painted in warm, cheerful shades of cream and sun-drenched yellow. and heavy velvet drapes were replaced with light, airy linens that allowed the coastal light to flood the rooms. The house began to breathe again. It began to feel like my sanctuary, not a museum of a failed marriage. During this period of transformation, Amelia was my constant companion. She had officially resigned from her position at the corporate law firm, finding the work of drafting contracts for soulless corporations hollow and unfulfilling after the righteous, high-stakes battle we had just fought. I can't go back to. That Aunt Kate, she confessed one evening as we sat on the newly redecorated terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and violet. Arguing over liability clauses feels so meaningless now. I want to do something that matters. Her words sparked an idea, a new purpose that began to form in the quiet corners of my mind. It was a seed that, once planted, began to grow with astonishing speed. One afternoon, as we sat in the sun-drenched living room, I turned to her, my heart beating with a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. "Amelia," I began, my voice clear and resolved, "I've made a decision about the estate, about our legacy. It's too much for one person. It needs a purpose beyond just existing, beyond just being a monument to wealth. And I think you are the key to that purpose." I saw the confusion in her eyes, and I leaned forward, my own eyes bright with my vision. I explained my plan. I wanted to restructure my entire estate, turning our primary holding company, the one I had reclaimed and renamed, into a powerful non-profit charitable foundation, but not a standard faceless one that just wrote checks. I wanted to create the Catherine Vance Foundation for Elder Justice. Its mission would be twofold and aggressive. First, to provide elite, pro bono legal services to elderly individuals who were victims of financial fraud, manipulation, and exploitation, people who, like me, were being preyed upon by their families, caregivers, or advisors. Second, to fund investigative journalism and advocacy for stronger state and federal legal protections for seniors. We wouldn't just fight battles. We would change the rules of the war. I want you to run it, I finished, looking directly at my brilliant, courageous niece. I want you to be the founding executive director. We'll hire the best, hungriest young lawyers who share our passion. We'll make Samuel Blackwood our senior advisor and chairman of the board. We will turn this house, this very place of my intended betrayal, into our headquarters. We will transform this building from a symbol of private wealth into a fortress of public justice. Amelia stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. "Aunt Kate, I don't know what to say. That's an incredible vision." "Say yes," I urged, my voice filled with a passion I thought I had lost forever. "You have the fire, the legal skill, and the righteous anger needed to lead this fight. You fought for me when no one else would. Imagine, Amelia, how many other Catherines are out there right now, silent in their own homes, being told they're confused and frail while their life's work is being stolen from under them. We can be their voice, can be their sword, and their shield." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of purpose. She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that sealed our new pact. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely yes." In that moment, a new legacy was born. We were no longer just aunt and niece. We were founders. The work was immediate and invigorating. It gave me a reason to wake up every morning. My physical limitations remained, but my mind, now freed from the fog of grief and deception, was sharper than ever. From my wheelchair, which I now thought of as my command center, I became the foundation's chief strategist and moral compass. I reviewed cases, helped shape our legal arguments, used my decades of business and financial experience to guide our planning. Amelia was our public face, the tireless advocate who fought in courtrooms and lobbied in state capitals. Our first case was a man whose son had coerced him into signing over the deed to his 100-year-old family farm. Our second was a woman whose new financial advisor had convinced her to put her entire life savings into a Ponzi scheme. With each case we took on, with each predator we held accountable, with each asset we recovered for a terrified senior, I felt a piece of my own deep wound begin to heal. The profound personal pain of Richard's betrayal was being transformed, alchemized into a powerful, impersonal force for good. My story was no longer just about me. It had become about all of us. 2 years passed, not in a quiet fade, but in a crescendo of purpose. The Vance Foundation for Elder Justice, once a radical idea born in a crisis, became a formidable institution. The grand rooms of my home, once silent witnesses to my lonely confinement, now echoed with the vibrant clatter of keyboards, the earnest murmur of legal debate, and the grateful tears of clients who had been given back their lives. We grew. What started with just Amelia and the guidance of Samuel Blackwood now included a team of 5 brilliant, fiercely dedicated lawyers, a rotating class of interns from top law schools, and a network of volunteer paralegals and forensic accountants. My role evolved. I was the queen on the chessboard, my movements limited, but my strategic view of the entire game absolute. From my command center, the sun-filled library overlooking the garden's eye, was the Foundation's soul, its memory, its unwavering moral. Compassed out Amelia, meanwhile, had undergone her own stunning transformation. The fiery, reactive anger she had felt on my behalf had been tempered and forged into the cool, hard steel of a master litigator. She was a force of nature in the courtroom, eloquent and unyielding. Her name, whispered with respect in state legal circles, was becoming a symbol of hope for the vulnerable and a harbinger of doom for those who preyed upon them. We won case after case. We reunited families with their stolen inheritances, saved homes from fraudulent foreclosures, and put more than a few con artists behind bars. But with our growing success came a more sophisticated class of adversary. We were no longer just fighting a greedy son or a manipulative caregiver. We were beginning to uncover systemic rot, deeply embedded networks of professionals who enabled and profited from the exploitation of the elderly. Our newest case was a perfect, heartbreaking example. Her name was Margaret Shaw, an 85-year-old artist of some renown in her youth, now in the clutches of early-stage Alzheimer's. Her paintings, vibrant and expressive abstracts, were the sum of her life's passion. Her son Anthony, in collusion with a wealth management firm named Sterling Wealth Advisors and a slick real estate agent, had systematically sold off her entire collection for a fraction of its worth. The official story was that the funds were desperately needed for Margaret's escalating and complex medical needs. The reality was that the money was funding Anthony's new beachfront property and a collection of European sports cars, while his mother languished in a bleak, understaffed care facility that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The parallels to my own story were so stark they made my breath catch in my throat. Margaret, like me, was having her identity, her life's work, and her dignity stripped away under the benevolent guise of care. As I immersed myself in the case files Amelia brought to my study, I saw the same monstrous playbook Richard and Marcus had used. A questionable declaration of incompetence from a compliant doctor, a confusing web of shell companies and trusts, and the slow, methodical isolation of the victim from anyone who might help her. They're using a firm called Sterling Wealth Advisors. Amelia told me during one of our late-night strategy sessions, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop. They're slick Aunt Kate. Their lawyers are masters of delay and obfuscation, burying us in mountains of paperwork, trying to bleed us dry. Sterling, ... I murmured, the name triggering a faint, unpleasant echo in the chambers of my memory. It felt connected to the dark time, but I couldn't place it. Amelia, I want you to dig into their corporate history. I don't care how long it takes. Find out who founded them, who their principal partners were 5, 10 years ago. A few days later, Amelia came into my study and shut the door behind her. Her face was pale, her expression grim. You were right to be suspicious, she said, her voice low. Sterling Wealth Advisors was founded 8 years ago. It's one of the 3 founding partners, though he apparently divested and sold his shares 3 years back was Marcus Thorne. The chill that ran down my spine was glacial. This wasn't just a similar case. This was the same disease, a new strain mutated from the original virus. Marcus hadn't just disappeared. He had franchised his particular brand of evil. He had created a monster that had outlived his direct involvement. a business model for sophisticated fraud that was now being replicated by his former protégés. "This is why they're fighting so viciously," I said, the pieces clicking into place. With sickening clarity, this isn't just about Margaret's case. If we expose their methods here, we could unravel their entire business model. This case could be the key that brings the whole rotten house of cards down. The fight for Margaret Shaw became my personal crusade. I pushed myself to my limits, spending long hours with our legal team via video conference, my mind honed by my own battle dissecting their strategies. I remembered the specific labyrinthine language Marcus used to create confusion. His particular brand of financial jargon designed to sound brilliant while obscuring theft. I saw his fingerprints, his ghosts all over Sterling's documents. I began to draft lines of questioning for the depositions, pointing our young lawyers toward the subtle loopholes and buried lies I was painfully equipped to recognize. The work took its toll. The late nights were physically exhausting, in the process of immersing myself in the mechanics of a betrayal. So similar to my own brought back waves of grief and helpless rage I thought I had processed. The phantom limb of my old life ached. One evening, Amelia found me slumped in my chair, staring out at the darkening garden. The screen of my tablet filled with complex financial charts that blurred before my eyes. "You need to rest, Aunt Kate," she said gently, her voice full of a concern that bordered on pleading. She placed a warm cashmere blanket over my shoulders. "You're pushing yourself too hard. You look exhausted." "This is my fight, Amelia," I replied, my voice weary but unyielding. "Don't you see? Marcus Thorne created the playbook that's destroying Margaret's life. He used me as his guinea pig, his test case. If I can't use what I learned from my own suffering to stop his legacy of greed, then what was the point of it? What was the point of my survival?" Amelia knelt beside my wheelchair, her posture so familiar, so comforting. So took my hand. "The point is that you did survive. The point is the foundation. The point is the dozens of people we've already saved from this fate. You don't have to carry the weight of every single battle on your own shoulders. You taught me how to fight, remember? You forged me into a weapon. Now let me be your weapon. Let me fight for you, for Margaret." Looking at her determined face, illuminated by the soft light of my desk lamp, I saw not just my beloved niece, but the remarkable leader she had become. I had given her a mission, and now she was reflecting my own strength back at me, reminding me that our new legacy was a shared one. It was a partnership built on something far stronger than blood or business. "All right," I conceded, a wave of gratitude washing over me. I squeezed her hand. "But I have one more idea. Final move. They're stonewalling us on the art appraisals, claiming the sales to their shell companies were at fair market value. It's their word against ours." I paused, a sly smile touching my lips for the first time in days. "I think I know someone who can help us prove otherwise." "Get me the phone. I need to call in a very old favor." I gave her the name of a man I had known for over 40 years, the most respected and feared art authenticator in the country. He was a notorious recluse, a curmudgeon, who rarely took on new clients. His name was Julian Croft, and he owed me one. It was time to collect. The ripples of my past were no longer just a source of pain. They were becoming a source of immense power. Julian Croft, when Amelia finally reached him at his secluded estate in the countryside, was exactly as cantankerous as I remembered. But when she explained the case of Margaret Shaw, his tone changed. His professional pride, a thing of legendary and fearsome proportions, was deeply offended by the notion of financially motivated Philistines, as he called them, so brazenly devaluing an artist's life, work for profit. His involvement was a game changer. Julian's expert report was not a dry academic document. It was a work of savage literary brilliance. He meticulously traced the provenance of each of Margaret's paintings, then cross-referenced them with the sale prices. He proved, with scathing and irrefutable detail, that her collection had been sold for, on average, 10 cents on the dollar of its true market value. He unmasked the buyers as a series of newly formed shell corporations, all linked through a convoluted ownership structure back to the two principal partners of Sterling Wealth Advisors. he had given us the smoking gun. Clear and undeniable pattern of racketeering. Armed with Julian's report, Samuel Blackwood filed a motion for an emergency hearing, accusing Sterling Wealth and Margaret's son, Anthony, of conspiracy and organized fraud. The court date was set. The ghost of Marcus Thorne's business model was about to be put on public trial. Then, 2 days before the hearing, a ghost of a different sort appeared at our door. Gaunt. A man, looking nervous, gaunt, and much older. Then I remembered, stood on the front steps of the foundation, asking to speak with me privately. It was Dr. Alistair Albright. The man who stood before me in my study was a pitiful shadow of the arrogant, self-assured psychiatrist who had so confidently tried to have me declared incompetent. The state medical board, presented with our evidence, had suspended his license indefinitely. His reputation was in tatters. He was working now, he explained in a low, humiliated mumble, as a part-time medical consultant for an insurance company. A humbling and precipitous fall from grace. "I know what Sterling Wealth is doing, Mrs. Vance," he said, twisting the brim of a worn hat in his hands. "They tried to hire me. After they heard my license was suspended, they approached me." I stared at him, my face an unreadable mask of stone, my heart pounding. "Hire you for what, doctor?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "To rubber stamp another fraudulent competency report for their files." He flinched but nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "They have a network. It's an open secret in certain circles. They call it asset protection for the infirm. It's a group of lawyers, financial advisors, real estate agents, and doctors. They identify wealthy, vulnerable seniors and work in concert to liquidate their assets before the family or the authorities can intervene. They wanted me to be one of their go-to medical experts. They said my suspension actually made me more attractive, less likely to ask questions." Amelia demanded from the corner of the room, her voice sharp as ice. "I said no," Albright insisted, his voice cracking with a desperate sincerity. He finally lifted his head and looked at me. "I lost everything because of what I did to you, Mrs. Vance. My career, my self-respect. My wife left me. I won't make that mistake again. I'm not here for a job. I came here because I have proof. I recorded the conversation. I have the emails. From their initial approach, I have the name of their lead recruiter, one of their senior partners. I'm willing to testify. I'll give you everything." We sat in stunned silence. The ghost from my past had returned, not as an antagonist, but as the potential key to blowing this entire criminal conspiracy wide open. His motives were undoubtedly selfish, a chance at some twisted form of redemption. Or perhaps just plain revenge against a system that had used and then discarded him, but his information was priceless. "Why should we believe you?" I asked, my voice still quiet, testing him. "Why shouldn't we assume this is some kind of elaborate trap?" "Because," he said, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine, painful remorse entered his eyes. "My own mother is in a nursing home now, and every time I visit her, I see your face. I see what could happen to her if I weren't there. What I did to you. It was wrong, not just because I got caught. It was fundamentally morally wrong, and this is the only way I know to make a small piece of it right." Giving Dr. Albright's information to our legal team felt like a profound and surreal moment. We were about to use the sworn testimony of one of my own tormentors to save another woman. It was a complex, messy, and deeply human turn of events that underscored the strange, tangled nature of justice. Samuel Blackwood was ecstatic. Albright's testimony would be the final nail in the coffin, giving them an insider's view of the conspiracy and corroborating everything Julian Croft's report had uncovered. The hearing was a legal bloodbath. Samuel Blackwood, with the fire of his glory days fully rekindled, first presented Julian Croft's devastating report. Then he called his surprise witness, Dr. Alistair Albright. The defense team for Sterling Wealth was visibly blindsided. Bright's testimony, delivered in a quiet, shame-faced monotone, was utterly damning. He laid bare their entire predatory model, played the recording, submitted the emails. The judge, a formidable woman in her late 60s with a famous intolerance, For elder abuse came down on sterling wealth and Margaret's son like a wrathful god. She not only froze every asset associated with the firm and with Anthony, but she took the extraordinary step of referring the case to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation under the RICO Act, a statute typically reserved for organized crime. Margaret's son, Anthony, was taken into custody directly from the courtroom, his face a mask of disbelief. We had one. We had not only saved Margaret's legacy, but we had decapitated a criminal network. As we left the courthouse, Amelia and I were surrounded by a throng of reporters. She handled them with the grace and authority of a seasoned stateswoman, speaking passionately about the need for systemic change and legislative reform. I stayed in the background, a quiet observer in my wheelchair, my heart swelling with a pride so immense it almost hurt. Later that evening, sitting in the quiet of my study, the victory felt different, deeper than my personal one against Richard. That had been a raw, desperate battle for my own survival. This was a battle for others. This was the fulfillment of the promise I had made to myself in the lonely darkness of my betrayal. "He did a good thing today, you know," Amelia said softly, knowing I was thinking of Albright. "Yes, he did," I agreed, looking out at the moonlit garden. "It doesn't erase what he did to me. It doesn't absolve him, but it changes the ending of his story. And, in a way, it changes the ending of ours. The ghosts of the past, I realized, never truly disappear. They linger in the shadows. But we have a choice. We can let them haunt us and paralyze us, or we can drag them out into the light and force them to serve a new purpose. We had taken the wreckage and ruin of my past and used it to build a fortress for others. The thought brought me a sense of profound peace that was deeper and more satisfying than any victory I had ever achieved in the world of business. It was the feeling of a legacy not just restored, but redeemed. The public downfall of Sterling. Wealth advisors sent shockwaves through the city's financial and legal communities. The district attorney's criminal investigation, fueled by our meticulously organized evidence and Dr. Albright's explosive testimony, led to a cascade of indictments. The asset protection network, so clever and so cruel, was systematically dismantled. It was a monumental victory, a landmark case that would become the cornerstone of our foundation's reputation. But for me, the true victory, the one that mattered most, was the quiet, personal restoration of Margaret Shaw. The first step was to get her out of the bleak, institutional facility her son had placed her in. Amelia found a beautiful, light-filled, assisted living community that specialized in memory care for artists and academics. It was more of a campus than a home, with studios, libraries, and magnificent gardens. We used a portion of the recovered funds to secure her a lovely apartment there, and to ensure she had round the clock, compassionate care for the rest of her life, her art collection, or what was left of it after we tracked it down from the shell. Corporations was returned. We had a private gallery space constructed adjacent to her new apartment, a place where her life's work could surround her once again. I visited her a few weeks after she had settled in. Her short-term memory, as the doctors had warned, was significantly impaired. She didn't recognize me or remember Amelia. She had no clear grasp of the complex legal battle that had been waged on her behalf. A part of me felt a pang of disappointment, a selfish wish for her to understand what we had done for her. But that feeling vanished the moment I wheeled myself into her private gallery. I found her standing before a large, half-finished canvas, a paintbrush held loosely but purposefully in her hand. Her eyes, which had seemed so clouded and distant, before now, clear and intensely focused. The room was filled with the familiar, comforting, and wonderfully messy scent of oil paint and turpentine. The chaos of creation. She looked up at me as I entered, a polite and distant smile on her face, the kind one gives to a helpful stranger. "It's a lovely day for painting, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft. "Yes, it is, Margaret," I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. "It is a perfect day." I watched her for nearly an hour as she worked. Her hands, though frail and spotted with age, moved with an innate certainty and grace across the canvas. She was lost in her own world, a vibrant, beautiful world of color and light and texture that no son, no lawyer, no con artist could ever steal from her. The legal victory, the frozen assets, the prison sentences, none of that mattered in this sunlit room. What mattered was this: a woman who had been systematically stripped of her voice, her work, and her dignity was able to stand in a safe, beautiful place and do the one thing that defined her. We hadn't just won her a lawsuit. We had given her back her soul. We had given her back her art. It was a victory not of retribution, but of profound restoration. Leaving Margaret's apartment that day, I felt a deep sense of clarity about our mission. Our work at the foundation was not just about punishment for the guilty. It was about peace for the innocent. It was not just about recovering assets. It was about restoring dignity. It was about allowing people to live out their final years, not as victims or burdens, but as the vibrant, complex human beings they had always been. This principle became the guiding force behind our next major initiative. Inspired by Margaret's story, we used a significant portion of the Foundation's endowment to create the Margaret's Light Grant program. It was an ambitious project designed to provide funding for arts, music, and horticultural therapy programs in nursing homes and assisted living facilities across the entire state. We wanted to bring joy, creativity, and beauty to places that were too often defined by loss, loneliness, and the sterile smell of disinfectant. The program was an overwhelming success. We were flooded with applications, and soon after, with letters and photos from the facilities we had funded. A 90-year-old former mechanic learning to play the piano for the first time. Grandmother with advanced dementia painting watercolors, with her visiting great-grandchildren, a new, colorful language between them. A choir of residents in their 80s and 90s, some in wheelchairs, some leaning on walkers. Their voices frail, but joyful as they performed for their community. These were not legal victories that made the headlines. They were small, quiet victories of the human spirit. They were the tangible, beautiful results of our new legacy. I kept a scrapbook of all the letters and photos. On the days when my own body felt particularly weak or the weight of the world felt too heavy, I would look through it. It was a powerful reminder that even from the depths of the most painful betrayal, it was possible to cultivate a garden that could bring light and beauty to countless others. 5 years after, Richard walked out the front door with his single suitcase. I sat in the garden he had once meticulously and rigidly planned, but it was my garden now in every sense of the word. Amelia had helped me hire a landscape architect who understood my vision of a more natural, flowing space. The oppressive, formal box hedges were gone, replaced with rambling, fragrant rose bushes. The severe geometric flower beds now overflowed with a chaotic and beautiful mix of perennials. A winding stone path, wide enough for my wheelchair, snaked through the entire property, allowing me to visit every corner of the world that was mine. The Vance Foundation was thriving, self-sustaining institution that had become a national model. Amelia was its heart and soul, guiding it with a strategic wisdom that belied her years. She was a respected and sometimes feared figure in Washington, D.C., frequently called upon by congressional committees to consult on federal legislation aimed at protecting seniors. She had become the powerful public voice I never knew I had, a warrior queen presiding over the fortress we had built together. My illness had progressed, as the doctors had always said it would. My world had shrunk physically. Most of my days were now spent within the confines of my home and garden, but my spirit, my influence, had never felt larger or more expansive. My home was no longer a place of confinement, but a bustling center of purpose, a place filled with the hopeful energy of our clients and the quiet satisfaction of meaningful, vital work one warm spring afternoon. As I was sitting on the terrace enjoying the scent of the climbing jasmine, Amelia came out and handed me a plain white envelope. "This came in the mail today," she said, her expression carefully neutral. It was from a small, private hospice center in a town in Central Florida I'd never heard of. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar. With a flicker of curiosity, I opened it. The letter was a brief, formal notification. Richard had passed away from a sudden, massive heart attack a week prior. The hospice was legally required to notify me as I was, in some ancient, dusty file, still listed as his next of kin. There was a single additional page of handwritten note from a hospice nurse. Mr. Vance volunteered here for the last 3 years, it read. He helped tend our small garden. He was quiet, but always kind to the patients. He asked that we send you this, should he pass. Tucked inside was a single, perfectly pressed magnolia blossom. I held the letter and the fragile browning flower in my hand, feeling the thinness of the paper. There was no grief, there was no anger, there was not even a flicker of triumph. There was only a quiet, profound, and final stillness. The last chapter of that old story was over. His life had ended in lonely obscurity, in a place far from the world of power and wealth he had coveted above all else. My life, however, was still being written every day, in the work we did, in the people we helped. Are you okay, Aunt Kate? Amelia asked softly, her hand resting on my shoulder. I am, I said, and the truth of it resonated deep in my bones. I am perfectly okay. I looked up at her, my brilliant, fierce niece, who had become the daughter of my heart, my truest partner. He inadvertently gave me the 2 greatest gifts of my life, I mused, a small, sad smile touching my lips. He showed me the depths of my own strength, and he gave me you. She smiled back, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. We do make a pretty good team. The best, I agreed. That evening, we held a small gathering in the garden to celebrate the Foundation's 5th anniversary. It was not a formal gala, but a warm, intimate party for our staff, our board, and some of the clients we had helped over the years. Margaret, the artist, was there, frail but content, brought by her loving daughter, with whom she had been joyfully reunited. The old farmer whose land we had saved from his predatory son brought us a huge basket of fresh vegetables. From his harvest, a woman who had recovered her life savings from a cruel phone scammer read a beautiful, funny poem she had written about a band of legal angels. As the sun set, casting a golden, benevolent glow over the laughing, talking faces, I looked around. At the vibrant community we had built from the ground up. This was my family now. This was my true home. This was the magnificent legacy that had risen from the ashes of a terrible betrayal. Richard had tried to take everything from me. He had seen me as a liability to be managed, an estate to be liquidated. But in his breathtaking greed, he had made a fatal, fundamental error. He had failed to see that a person's true worth is not in what they own, but in what they build, what they protect, and what they give back to the world. He had tried to write the final, tragic ending to my story, but instead, he had inadvertently given me the power and the freedom to create a brilliant new beginning. One more beautiful, more meaningful, and more lasting than I could ever have possibly imagined. The years that followed were my quietest, and in many ways my most profound. My body grew frailer, my physical world eventually shrinking to my sunlit bedroom and the ever-changing masterpiece of the garden visible from its large bay windows. But as my body diminished, my spirit seemed to expand. My legacy was no longer a project to be built, but a living, breathing entity to be nurtured. The Vance Foundation was a force. My role shifted from that of a queen on a chessboard to something more akin to a revered oracle. The young, passionate lawyers who now walked the halls of my home, halls once stalked by Marcus Thorne, would bring their toughest cases to my bedside. They would sit on the chintz armchair Amelia had placed by my window, and we would talk for hours. Discussed legal strategy? Yes, but more than that. We discussed the human cost of greed, the absolute necessity of dignity, and the moral clarity required to fight for those who had no one left to fight for them. I taught them to see beyond the dense pages of case files and financial statements, to see the terrified human heart at the center of the storm. Never forget, I would tell them, that you are not just recovering assets. You are restoring a soul. One crisp autumn afternoon, when the garden was a blaze of gold and crimson, Amelia came to me with a file. She looked different now, a woman in her prime, confident and serene. But her eyes still held the same fierce love they had when she was a girl sneaking me pastries. She sat beside me, taking my hand, its skin now thin as parchment. I have something to show you, she said gently. It's a grant application for the Margaret's Light program. She opened the file. It contained a proposal from a small, underfunded hospice center in a rural, impoverished county. Their budget was stretched to the breaking point. They were requesting a modest grant to build a simple, beautiful, wheelchair-accessible garden where their terminally ill patients, many of whom had no family, could spend their final days surrounded by the peace of nature. As I read the proposal, my eyes fell upon the name of the facility at the top of the page: the Last Mile Hospice of Collier County, Florida. It was the same center that had sent me the notification of Richard's death all those years ago. A wave of complex, indescribable emotion washed over me. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was the dizzying, profound sense of the world coming full circle, of a story finding its final, perfect, and most unexpected rhyme. The place where my husband's life had ended in lonely obscurity was now, through a twist of fate, asking for help, for a sliver of light from the foundation I had built directly from the wreckage of his betrayal. "What should we do?" Amelia asked, her gaze gentle and knowing, understanding the immense significance of the request without a word being spoken. For a long, silent moment, I felt the faint, ghostly flicker of the old, cold anger. A part of me, the part that still remembered the sting of his Judas kiss, wanted to deny the request, to write rejected on the page and sever that final, tenuous link to my past. But then I looked away from the file and out my own window at the vibrant, living tapestry of my garden, the rambling roses Amelia had planted, the winding stone path that gave me freedom, the weathered oak bench where our young lawyers often sat to think. I thought of the profound, healing peace this small patch of earth had given me in my darkest hours. "Fund them," I said, my voice quiet, but with an utter certainty that left no room for doubt. "Fund them completely. Double their request. And Amelia," I added, meeting her eyes, "I want you to establish a permanent endowment for the perpetual care of that garden. Name it the Magnolia Garden." Amelia smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that held all the love and understanding in the world. "I thought you'd say that," she whispered. In that decision, in that single act of grace, I felt the last vestiges of Richard's power over me, the last shadow of his memory dissolve into light. He was no longer a ghost to be vanquished or a memory to be erased. He was simply a part of a long, painful, and complicated story that had, against all odds, led to this moment of transcendent compassion. My legacy was not built on the foundations of my anger, but on the strength of my empathy. It was not defined by my personal battle, but by a universal, unbreakable principle that dignity is the most valuable asset of all, and it is our sacred job to protect it for everyone, without exception, approving that Grant was one off the final major acts of my life. It was the final, perfect brick in the fortress of purpose I had built. It was my last quiet act of defiance against the bitterness that could have so easily consumed me. A testament to the enduring idea that light can be found in the most unexpected of places, even at the very, very end of the road. My last days were spent in my own bed, in my own home, looking out at the garden. The world had become a soft-focus watercolor painting seen through the pane of glass that separated me from the cool autumn air, the vibrant, defiant greens of the late season. Leaves the final, desperate splash of red from the last of the roses, the gentle, forgiving gray of the sky. The bustling sounds of the foundation, the ringing phones, the passionate debates, had faded to a distant, comforting hum. I was not alone. Amelia was always there, her hand holding mine, her presence a warm, steady, and unwavering anchor in the shifting tides. The foundation was in her hands now, its future, its mission, absolutely secure. The work would continue. The fight would go on. My name was carved not on a cold granite tombstone in some grand mausoleum Richard might have planned, but on the living cornerstone of an institution that fought for the voiceless. And more importantly, my story was etched in the hearts of the people we had helped. One afternoon, as a gentle rain began to fall, misting the garden in a soft silver haze and tracing winding paths down the window pane, I turned my head on the pillow and looked at Amelia. Her beautiful face was etched with a sorrow she could not hide, But beneath it was the profound, unshakable strength I had watched her cultivate over so many years. She was ready. "Don't be sad," I whispered, my voice as thin and fragile as a dried leaf. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She followed my gaze out the window, her own eyes filling with tears. "What is Aunt Kate?" "All of it," I said, a faint, peaceful smile touching my lips. "The rain, the roses, the fight, the betrayal, the victory. All of it. It's all part of the same beautiful, terrible, wonderful story." I thought of Margaret Shaw at her canvas, lost in a world of color. I thought of the old farmer, his hands deep in the soil of the land we had saved for him. I thought of the letters. In my scrapbook, testimonials of lives restored. I thought of the ghost of my husband, volunteering in obscurity, the garden that would now bloom at the place where he died. A final, anonymous act of grace. I had lost a husband, but I had gained a sacred purpose. I had lost my mobility, but I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. I had faced the ugliest of betrayals and had, with Amelia by my side, managed to build something truly beautiful in its wake. As my eyes grew heavy and the world began to soften at the edges, the image of my garden washed clean by the gentle rain was the last thing I saw. It was not an ending. It was a harvest. It was a legacy planted in scorched and salted earth that would continue to grow, to shelter, and to bloom long, long after I was gone. The quiet hum of the foundation, the distant sound of justice being done, was the final, gentle music that carried me peacefully away. The house was quiet for a moment, and then, from downstairs, a phone began to ring, and my work, continued.